Chapter 36. The Wind's Own Private Thoroughfare. 3 uneventful days passed. Not one thing happened. The shipmen didn't show. I fixed meals, ate them, read my book, and when the sun went down, I drank whiskey and went to sleep. The morning air of the pasture turned steadily cooler. Day by day, the bright golden leaves of the birches turned more spotted as the first winds of winter slipped between the withered branches and across the highlands toward the southeast. Stopping in the center of the pasture, I could hear the winds clearly. No turning back, they pronounced. The brief autumn was gone. Without exercise and without smoking, I had quickly gained 6 pounds. So I started to get up at 6 and jog a crescent halfway around the pasture. That took off a couple of pounds. It was tough not smoking, but with no store around for 20 miles, what was one to do? Each time I felt like smoking, I thought about her and her years. Compared to everything I'd lost this far, losing smoking was trivial. And indeed, it was. With all this free time, I cooked up a storm. I made a roast beef. I defrosted a salmon and marinated it. I searched the pasture for edible vegetables and simmered my findings with bonito flakes and soy sauce. I made simple cabbage pickles. I prepared a number of snacks in case the shipmen showed up for a drink. The shipmen, however, never came. Most of the afternoons I would pass looking out at the pasture. I soon began seeing things. A figure emerging from the birchwoods and running straight in my direction. Usually it was the shipman, but sometimes it was the rat, sometimes my girlfriend, other times it was the sheep with the star on its back. In the end, though nobody ever materialized, only the winds blowing across the pasture. It was as if the pasture were the wind's own private thoroughfare. The winds raced across the pasture, never looking back, on missions of utmost urgency. On the 7th day after my arrival on the mountain, the first snow fell. The winds had been unusually calm from morning, the skies overcast with dense lead-grey clouds. After morning run and shower, as I settled down to coffee and records, the snow started. A hard snow. I struck the window panes with a battery of dull thuds. The wind had picked up, driving the snow down at a 30-degree angle, rather like the slanting lines of some department store wrapping paper pattern. Soon the storm intensified and everything outside was awash in white. The entire mountain range and woods were obscured. This was no pitiful snow as sometimes falls in Tokyo. This was the real thing, an honest-to-goodness North Country snow. A snow to blanket everything and freeze deep into the heart of the earth. The snow was blinding. I drew the curtain and curled up to read by the heater. The record ended and the needle lifted and all was silence. The sort of silence that follows in the wake of the death of all living things. I set down my book and, for no particular reason, felt the urge to walk through the house. From the living room into the kitchen, checking the storeroom, bath and cellar, upstairs to open the doors of each room. There was no one, of course, only silence which rolled like oil into every corner. Only silence which changed ever so slightly from room to room. I was all alone, probably more alone than I had been in all my life. I had been dying for a smoke the past 2 days, but as there were no cigarettes, I had been drinking whiskey straight. One winter like this, and I'd end up an alcoholic. Not that there was enough liquor around to do the trick, though. 3 bottles of whiskey, 1 bottle of brandy, 12 cases of canned beer, and no more. Obviously, the same thought had occurred to the rat. Was my partner, my former partner that is, still hitting the bottle? Had he managed to put the company in order, turn it back into a small translation firm as I suggested? Maybe he had done exactly that, but could he really make a go of it without me, as he worried? Our time together was up, 6 years together and now back to square one. The snow let up by early afternoon, abruptly, just as it had begun. The thick clouds tore off in places as grand columns of sunlight thrust down to play in the pasture. It was magnificent. The hard snow lay sprinkled on the ground like candy, solidified into pellets as if to defy melting away. Yet by the time the clock struck 3, the snow had all but melted. The ground was thoroughly wet, the twilight sun enfolding the pasture in a soft light. The birds sang as if set free. After dinner, I borrowed 2 books from the rat's room, Bread Baking and the Conrad novel, then made myself comfortable on the living room sofa. One third of the way into the novel, I came across a 4-inch square newspaper clipping the rat had been using for a bookmark. No date, but from the color of the paper, it must have been recent. It was local news, a symposium on aging and society to be held at a Sapporo hotel, a rally at a train station near Asahikawa, a lecture on the Middle East crisis, nothing to grab the rat's interest or mine. On the reverse, classified ads, I yawned, shot the book, went to heat up the leftover coffee. I suddenly realized that this was the first time, in what now seemed like years, that I had seen a newspaper and that I had been left behind an entire week from the goings on of the world. No radio or television, no newspaper, no magazines. A nuclear missile could have destroyed Tokyo, an epidemic could have swept the world, Martians could have occupied Australia. I wouldn't have known. Of course, the Land Cruiser in the garage had a radio, but I discovered that I had no pressing desire to go listen after all. If something could take place without my knowing, it was just as well. I had no real need to know. I, in any case, had plenty on my mind already. Something gnawed at me, something that had passed before my eyes, but which I had been too dense to notice. All the same, on an unconscious level, it had registered. I deposited my coffee cup in the sink and returned to the living room. I took another look at the newspaper clipping. There it was on the reverse. Attention, rat. Get in touch. Urgent. Dolphin Hotel, room 406. I put the clipping back in the book and sank into the sofa. So the rat knew I was looking for him. Question, how had he found the item? By accident? When it come down off the mountain? Or maybe he'd been searching for something through several weeks' worth of papers? And why didn't he contact me? Had I already checked out of the Dolphin Hotel by the time he came across it? Had his telephone line already gone dead? No, the rat could have gotten in touch if he wanted to. He just didn't want to. Because I was at the Dolphin Hotel, he figured I'd find my way up here, so that if he wanted to see me, he had only to wait, or at least leave me a note. What it boiled down to was this. For some reason, that rat didn't want to face me. Even so, he wasn't rejecting me. If he didn't want me here, he could have shot me out any number of ways. It was his house, after all. Grappling with these two propositions, I watched the second hand sweep slowly across the face of the clock. After one full circumgyration, my reason had made no progress. I couldn't figure out what lay at the center of all this. The shipman knew nothing, that much was certain. Someone had monitored my arrival on the scene, was sure to know about the rats living here for 6 months. The more I thought about it, the more difficult I found it to escape the feeling that the shipman's actions reflected the rat's will. The shipman had driven my girlfriend from the mountain and left me here all alone. His showing up here was undoubtedly a harbinger of something. Something was progressing all around me. The area was being swept clean and purified. Something was about to happen. I turned out the lights and went upstairs, climbed into the bed, and looked out at the moon and pasture. Stars peeked through the tear in the clouds. I opened the window and smelled the night air. Among the rustling leaves, I could hear a call in the distance, a strange cry, neither bird nor beast. I woke and went for my run in the pasture, showered and ate breakfast. A morning like the others, the sky was overcast like the day before, but the temperature had risen a bit. Not much chance of snow. Into jeans and a sweater and a jacket over that, then tennis shoes, and I was off across the pasture. Heading off for the woods to the east where I'd seen the shipman disappear, I made my way into the thicket. There was no real path to speak of, no sign of human life. Occasionally there'd be an old birch toppled over. The forest floor was flat, except for a long, yard-wide trough, like a dried-up stream bed or an abandoned trench. The trough wound its way through the woods for miles, sometimes sunken deep, sometimes shallow, ankle-deep in dead leaves. The ditch gave onto a ridge trail, both sides of which sloped down to dry hollows. Plump birds shuffled across the path through the leaves, losing themselves in the undergrowth. Here and there, brush azaleas blazed bright red. I walked around for an hour and lost all sense of direction. At this rate, I was hardly going to find the shipman. I roamed the bottom of one dry hollow until I heard the sound of water. I sought out the river, then followed it downstream. If my memory served me correctly, there had to be a waterfall, and near it, the road we'd walked up. After another 10 minutes, I came across the waterfall, splashing as it struck the rocks in the gorge below, lapping into frozen pools. There was no sign of fish, though a few fallen leaves traced slowly circles on the surface of the pools. I crossed from rock to rock, made my way down below the falls, then crawled up the slippery opposite bank. I had reached the road. Seated on the edge of a bridge, watching me, was the shipman. A big sailcloth bag of firewood was slung over his shoulder. "Wander around too much, you'll be beer bat," said the shipman. "There's bound to be one about in these parts, you know. Yesterday afternoon found our traces. If you have to walk around, you have to put a bell on your hip like us." The shipman shook a little bell fastened to his hip with a safety pin. "I've been looking for you," I said after catching my breath. "I know," said the shipman. "I've been seeing you searching." "Well then, why didn't you call out?" "You're the one who wanted to search me out, so I held back." The shipman took a cigarette out of his pocket and smoked it with great pleasure. I sat down next to him. "You live around here?" Said the shipman. "But don't tell anybody. Nobody knows." "But my friend knows all about you." Silence. "You know, it's a very important matter." Silence. "And if you're friends with my friend, then that makes us friends, no?" "I guess so," said the shipman cautiously. "I guess probably does." "And if you're my friend, and you wouldn't lie to me, would you? Think about it." No," answered one perplexed shipman. He licked his parched lips. "I can tell you I'm real sorry. I can't tell you. I can't. I'm not supposed to." "Someone's put it to you to keep quiet?" The shipman climbed up. The wind whistled through the barren trees. "Nobody's around here to hear," I whispered. The shipman looked at me in the eye. "You don't know anything about our way here, do you?" "No, I don't." "Well, listen, this is no ordinary place we got here. That much you should keep in mind." "But just the other day you told me this was such a nice country." "For us, yes," said the shipman. "For us, this is the only place to live. If we were chased out of here, we'd have no place to go." At that, the shipman shut up. He would not say another word on the subject. I looked at his sailcloth bag filled with firewood. "That you're heating for the winter?" The shipman nodded silently. "But I didn't see any smoke." "No fire yet. Not till snow sets in. But even after it snows, you wouldn't be able to see the smoke from our fire. We got a special way of building fires." He grinned, self-satisfied. "So when will the snow begin to pile up around here?" The shipman looked up at the sky, then looked at me. "The snow will come early this year, maybe another 10 days. "In another 10 days the road will freeze over?" "Probably. Nobody coming up and nobody going down. Wonderful time of year." "And you've been living here how long?" "Long time," said the shipman. "Real long time." "What do you eat?" "Tuber shoots, nuts, birds, whatever little fish and crabs I can catch." "Don't you get cold?" "Winter's supposed to be cold. If you need something, I'd be glad to share whatever I've got." "Thanks, but I'm fine just now." The shipman suddenly stood up and started walking off in the direction of the pasture, so I got up to follow him. "Why'd you take to hiding out up here?" "You'd laugh if I told you," said the shipman. "No, I wouldn't laugh, I swear," I said. "I couldn't imagine what there'd be to laugh about." "You won't tell anyone?" "I won't tell anyone." I didn't want to go off to the war. For the next few minutes we walked on without words between us. "War with whom?" I asked. "Don't know," coughed the shipman. "But I didn't want to go. Anyway, that's why I'm a ship who stays where he belongs up here." "You from Junitakicho?" "Uh-huh, but don't tell anyone." "I won't," I said. "But you don't like the town?" "The town down there?" "Yeah. Don't like it at all. Too full of soldiers." The shipman coughed again. "Where are you from?" "Tokyo." "Heard about the war?" "Nope." At that, the shipman seemed to lose all interest in me. He remained silent until we reached the entrance to the pasture. "Care to stop by the house?" I asked the shipman. "Got to lay in winter supplies," he said. "Real busy. Maybe next time." "I'd like to see my friend," I said. "I've got something I have to see him about next week." The shipman shook his head forlornly. His ears flapped. "Sorry, but like I said before, it's not up to us." "Well, then pass the word on if you can." Said the shipman. "Thanks a lot," I said. I turned to leave. "If you go out walking," the shipman called out as he departed, "make sure you don't forget the bell." I headed straight back for the house as the shipman disappeared into the woods to the east, the same as before. The winter dark, wordless, green pasture stretched between us. The afternoon I baked bread. The rat's bread baking proved to be a thoughtfully written cookbook. On the cover was written, "If you can read, then you can bake bread." It was no exaggeration. The smell of bread filled the house, making it warm all over. For a fledgling effort, it didn't taste too bad either. There was plenty of flour and yeast in kitchen, enough for bread the whole winter long, if it turned out I had to stay. And more rice and spaghetti than I cared to think about. That evening, I had bread and salad and ham and eggs with canned peaches for dessert. The next morning, I cooked rice and made a pilaf of canned salmon and seaweed and mushrooms. For lunch, it was cheesecake from the freezer and strong milk tea. At snack time, I treated myself to hazelnut ice cream topped with coinstraw. In the evening, broiled chicken and a can of Campbell's soup. I was putting on weight again. Early in the afternoon of the 9th day, as I was looking through the bookcase, I noticed one volume that seemed like it may have been read recently. It was the only one without dust on it, its spine protruding a bit farther out than the rest. I pulled it out and sat on the chaise lounge to flip through it. They had it as a Pan-Asianism, a wartime edition. The paper was cheap and gave off a stink when I turned the pages. The contents, as expected from a wartime publication, terribly one-sided, real boring too, stuffed to yarn over every 3 pages. On some pages, words had been crossed out. There was not a single line on the February 26th incident. Tucked into the book, toward the end, was a sheet of white notepaper. After yellowing pages, that white sheet came as some kind of a miracle. It marked, on the right pen, an addendum to the book, a list of names, birth dates, and permanent residences of all that so-called Pan-Asianists, famous and unknown. I scanned the list from top to down, and there around the middle was the boss, the very same shipped boss in whose name I had been brought here, his permanent residence, Hokkaido, Junitako-cho. In a daze, I set the book down in my lap. Words didn't even form in my head. It was as if someone or something had given me a solid whack from behind. How could I not have figured it out? It should have occurred to me first thing. The moment I learned that the boss was from a poor farming background in Hokkaido, I should have checked up on it. No matter how skillfully the boss managed to rub out his past, there would have been some way to sort out the facts. That black-suited secretary would surely have looked it up for me. Well, no, maybe not. I shook my head. No way, he wouldn't have looked that up himself. The man was not so careless. He would have checked every possible angle, complicated or not, just as he had done his homework on me. So he already knew everything. That was indisputable. And yet he had gone to great lengths to convince me, or rather to blackmail me, in order to get me up here. Why? If it was something that needed doing, surely he was in a better position to do it, and to do a crack job of it. And if I were for some reason to be upon, why wouldn't he have told me the name of the place from the beginning? As I sorted through my confusion, I started to get mad. More and more, this had turned into one grotesque comedy of mishaps, and I didn't think it was funny. How much did the rat know? And while we were at it, how much did the man in the black suit know? Here I was, smack in the center of everything without a clue. At every turn, I had been way off base, way off the mark. Of course, you could probably say the same thing about my whole life. In that sense, I suppose I had no one to blame. All the same, what gave them the right to treat me like this? I had been used, I had been beaten, I had been wrung dry. I was ready to get the hell off the mountain, but somehow that offered no satisfaction. I had gotten in too deep. It would have been so easy, if only I could have cried. But crying wasn't an option, because I felt that far ahead of me there was something really worth crying about. I went into the kitchen and got a bottle of whiskey. I could think of nothing to do but drink.